Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. So great to have you with us again.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
You know the drill. We sift through all the dense stuff, the articles, the research, maybe even those napkin scribbles.
Mm-hmm. Definitely been there.
And we try to make it, make sense for you. Your shortcut to sounding clever.
That's the idea. We do the reading so you get the highlights, those aha moments.
Exactly. And hey, before we jump in proper, quick shout out, got to do it for our buddy Micky.
Oh yeah, Micky.
His YouTube channel, Mickytolife. Still awesome. Seriously, check it out if you haven't. Fun stuff. Go subscribe, show some love.
Good times over there. Worth a click.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we've been kind of wrestling with a big one, the United Nations.
Mm-hmm. Big topic.
We looked into its history, what it's supposed to do, and honestly, whether it's still relevant today with everything going on.
Yeah, does it still pack a punch?
We've got a pile of sources here. So the mission today, give you a solid grasp of the UN, maybe some surprising bits, and tackle that question, does it still matter?
Sounds like a plan. Where do we start?
Okay, first things first. What is the United Nations, basically?
Well, fundamentally, it's this international body set up in 1945, right after World War II.
Okay.
And the absolute core reason was to maintain international peace and security.
To stop another world war, basically.
Precisely. The devastation was just unimaginable. It was a huge wake-up call. We needed something different.
Totally. You can just picture everyone going, right, never again. We need a system.
Uh-huh.
So it came directly out of that horror.
Absolutely.
And I remember reading about the UN Charter. I said, its rule book, its constitution.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's the foundational document.
Okay.
It was signed in San Francisco, June 26, 1945, and then it officially came into force October 24th that year.
And that lays out all the rules of the road.
Exactly. The purposes, the principles, the structure, how it's all meant to work.
Got it. So who are the main players setting this up, the ones there from day one?
Well, our sources highlight the big four victorious powers from WWII. China, represented initially by the Republic of China, the U.S., the U.K., and the Soviet Union.
Right.
They were key signatories early on and really drove the formation.
And China. Interesting. It was a founder and a permanent Security Council member from the start.
Yep, that's right.
Because my sense is China's position there, it's had some twists and turns, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You've hit on a really central and pretty complicated part of the story.
Okay.
So the UN Charter, Article 23 specifically, lists the Republic of China, the ROC, as one of the 5 permanent members, P5 as they call them.
Right, the ones with the veto.
Exactly. But then who actually represented China at the UN? That became a huge diplomatic headache after 1949 when the People's Republic of China, the PRC, was established.
Ah, okay. So you had 2 governments claiming to be the China.
Precisely. Which one gets the seat? It was a major standoff.
Okay, walk us through that shift. How did it unfold? Sounds dramatic.
It really was. So starting around 1950, the Soviet Union and gradually more countries started arguing, hey, the PRC, the government controlling the mainland, they should have the seat.
Makes sense from their perspective, I guess?
Right. Mao Zedong even picked a guy, Zhang Wentian, to be the PRC rep in 1950.
Did he take the seat?
Nope, never got to. Because the PRC didn't actually hold the seat yet. It was like having the job title, but no office.
Wow. So limbo. And then the Korean War happened. How did that affect things?
Massively. It threw a huge spanner in the works. The PRC got involved, fighting against UN forces, technically under the banner of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army.
Whoa. Okay, that's awkward.
Extremely awkward. It led to the UN General Assembly passing Resolution 498 in early 51.
What would that say?
It basically called the PRC's involvement aggression.
Against the UN itself, effectively.
Yeah. And then a few months later, Resolution 500 slapped an arms embargo on the PRC in North Korea.
So the UN is condemning the very government some members want to give a permanent seat to. Yikes.
Exactly. Talk about internal conflict. It was intense.
I bet. What else is going on?
Well, the ROC, still holding the seat, wasn't quiet either. In 52, they accused the Soviet Union of violating the UN Charter and their own treaty.
Really?
Yeah, it led to another General Assembly resolution, 505, which actually condemned the Soviet actions after an investigation.
Man, so much drama back then.
And the ROC used its power, too. In 1955, they vetoed Mongolia's application to join the UN.
Why Mongolia?
Because the ROC still considered Mongolia part of China. So they used the veto to make a political point about territory.
That veto. Keeps coming up, doesn't it?
It's central to the Security Council's power dynamics.
So how did the U.S. and others handle this two China's problem?
The U.S. was worried, Cold War context. They
Yeah.
didn't want another communist nation with a permanent veto.
Right.
So between 1950 and 1960, they pushed this strategy called a moratorium. Basically, kicking the can down the road, delaying any real decision on China's representation.
Stall tactics.
Pretty much. And most U.S. allies went along with it. The Soviets, of course, protested this.
Makes sense.
But
things couldn't stay stalled forever, right? What changed?
the 1960s, you had this huge wave of decolonization, lots of newly independent nations joining the UN, especially from Africa and Asia.
And they felt differently.
Many were more sympathetic to the PRC. They saw it as the legitimate government of mainland China.
The numbers started shifting in the General Assembly.
Exactly. Albania, which was aligned with the PRC at the time, started proposing resolutions to give the seat to Beijing and kick out Taipei.
Did that work initially?
Not at first. U.S. influence was still pretty strong.
So what did the U.S. try next?
They tried a procedural move, the important question resolution.
What was that?
It argued that changing China's representation was such a big deal, it needed a 2/3 majority vote in the General Assembly, not just a simple majority.
A higher bar to clear, hoping to keep the ROC in?
Yeah.
Clever?
Well, it was a tactic, yeah, but it didn't work.
Oh. What happened?
October 25, 1971. A very significant date. First, the important question proposal itself was voted down, 59 against, 55 for.
Close.
Very close. Then another idea was floated, maybe dual representation, let both PRC and ROC have seats.
Like two Koreas or something.
Kind of, but that was rejected too.
So the momentum was clearly with the PRC.
It really seemed that way. Sensing this, the ROC delegation actually walked out of the General Assembly hall before the main vote.
Wow, dramatic exit.
And then the General Assembly passed Resolution 2758.
The big one.
The big one. 76 votes in favor, 35 against, 17 abstentions. It recognized the PRC government as the sole legitimate representative of China in the UN.
And expelled the ROC representative.
Explicitly. It said it expelled the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek from the place which they unlawfully occupy. Pretty strong language.
No kidding. So when did the PRC actually sit down?
Their first delegation attended the General Assembly on November 15th, 1971.
And what happened to the ROC's UN mission stuff?
Interestingly, their internal regulations for their UN mission were suspended, but technically never abolished, keeping the name badge just in case.
Fascinating piece of diplomatic history.
Mm-hmm.
Shows how the UN reflects these huge geopolitical shifts.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to those 5 permanent members with the veto: China, now PRC, France, Russia, UK, USA. That structure is still fundamental.
Right. Okay, which leads us perfectly into the next big question, the one I think is on a lot of people's minds.
As the UN lost its meaning.
Yeah, exactly. It was set up to prevent war, but, look around. Conflicts are everywhere. Is it still effective?
It's a completely valid question, and it's complicated. The world sees aggression, sees war, so naturally people ask, what's the UN actually doing about it?
Right.
And this is where those limitations, especially the Security Council veto, become really, really critical.
Yeah, let's talk about that veto again. How does it, stop the UN from acting?
Well, think about it. If one of the P5 countries is the aggressor, or if it's a close ally of an aggressor,
they could just block any action against them.
Bingo. They can veto any Security Council resolution that tries to condemn them, impose sanctions, authorize intervention, anything meaningful. It effectively shields them.
Can you give a clear example?
The most obvious recent one is Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Okay.
Russia, being a P5 member, has repeatedly vetoed Security Council resolutions aimed at condemning its actions or holding it accountable.
So the Security Council, the body meant for peace and security, is basically sidelined.
In that specific instance, regarding binding action against Russia itself,
yes,
it's paralyzed by the veto.
That's deeply problematic, isn't it?
And absolutely highlights a core challenge in the UN's design.
So if the Security Council is stuck, what about the General Assembly? All the other countries?
The General Assembly can act. They can pass resolutions. And they have multiple times regarding Ukraine, for example.
And what impact does that have?
Well, these resolutions carry significant moral and political weight. They show the broad consensus of the international community. Huge majorities condemned Russia's actions.
But there's a but, isn't there?
There is. Unlike Security Council resolutions under Chapter 7 of the Charter, General Assembly resolutions are generally considered non-binding legally.
So it's like a global expression of disapproval, but without teeth. No enforcement.
That's a fair way to describe it. They signal condemnation, they isolate a country diplomatically, but they can't force a country to stop fighting or withdraw troops.
Right. So the UN's power to actually prevent or stop aggression seems limited. Is it just the veto? Or are there other factors?
The veto is huge, but no, it's not the only thing. There's a whole messy reality of international politics and national sovereignty.
Sovereignty, meaning countries basically do what they want.
Well, the UN is built on respecting the sovereignty of its member states. It's not a world government. It can't just dictate orders. Enforcement relies heavily on the cooperation of member states. And getting that cooperation, well, that's tricky.
Because countries have their own interests.
Exactly. National interests, alliances, economic dependencies, geopolitical calculations, they all come into play.
So even if the UN agrees something should happen, some countries might just sit it out or even work against it.
Precisely. Collective action is hard when interests diverge. Look at the Ukraine votes again. While most condemned Russia, several countries abstained.
Why would they do that?
Various reasons, maybe economic ties to Russia, maybe political alignment, maybe just a desire not to get involved in what they see as a great power conflict.
So that division weakens the UN's response.
Definitely. A fragmented response lacks the punch of unified action. It makes it harder for the UN to fulfill that core security mandate effectively when powerful states are involved.
It feels like a system with great intentions, but maybe designed for a world that doesn't quite exist anymore, or maybe never did.
That's a deep question. The structure that prevents unilateral dominance by one power can also, ironically, shield powerful states when they themselves violate the rules.
A real catch-22.
It raises fundamental questions about how an organization based on sovereign equality can deal with violations by its most powerful members.
Heavy stuff. Okay, so beyond the big peace and security questions, what else does the UN do? Is it involved in other areas where maybe it's more effective?
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial not to forget that. The UN system is vast. Think about all the specialized agencies and programs.
Like what?
Well, China, for instance, is deeply involved now in places like the FAO Food and Agriculture Organization.
Right, tackling hunger.
The ICAO, dealing with international flights. The IMF, global finance. The WHO, World Health Organization.
Obviously huge.
UNESCO for culture and education. And peacekeeping operations, too, contributing troops. It's a massive network.
So lots of practical on-the-ground work happening in health development, setting standards.
Exactly. Work that often doesn't make headlines but impacts millions of lives positively. That side of the UN is undeniable.
Okay, that's important context. And one other thing. The whole issue with Taiwan, the Republic of China, wanting back in somehow, that's still bubbling away, isn't it?
Still very much a live issue, yes. The government in Taiwan, the ROC government, they argue that Resolution 2758...
The one that gave the seat to the PRC.
Right. They say it only decided who represents China at the UN, but it didn't actually settle Taiwan's own status or its right to participate internationally.
So they see themselves as separate from that decision.
Essentially, yes. And since the early 90s, they've been trying various ways to gain participation, maybe not full membership always, but meaningful involvement under different names.
And the PRC's position on that is predictably firm.
Extremely firm. Beijing maintains that Resolution 2758 settled everything. In their view, it affirmed that Taiwan is part of China, period.
The one China principle.
Exactly. So any move by Taiwan towards UN participation is seen by the PRC as separatism and a challenge to that principle.
A fundamental clash of interpretations over that one resolution. How are other countries reacting now?
Well, there's been a noticeable shift recently. More countries and groups of parliamentarians like the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPACs, are openly questioning the PRC's interpretation.
How so?
They're promoting this initiative 2758, arguing the resolution doesn't equate to the one China principle in international law and shouldn't block Taiwan's participation in international bodies.
Interesting. Are governments acting on this?
We're seeing legislative moves. Parliaments in Australia, the Netherlands, the EU Parliament, and the U.S. Congress passing things like the Taiwan International Solidarity Act.
What do they do?
They generally express support for Taiwan's meaningful participation and push back against the PRC narrative about Resolution 2758.
So, growing international support for Taiwan's space, challenging Beijing's line. What about inside Taiwan? Do all the political parties agree on how to handle this?
There are nuances. The current ruling party, the DPP, tends to focus on countering what it calls China's misinterpretation of the resolution. The main opposition, the KMT, has sometimes talked about actually trying to get the resolution revised. The newer Taiwan People's Party also supports participation and wants more transparency.
So, agreement on the goal, more international space, but maybe different tactics or emphasis on how to get there or what the core problem is.
That seems fair to say. It reflects the complex political landscape within Taiwan itself.
Man, history, politics, law. It's all tangled up, isn't it?
Deeply.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what are the key takeaways for someone trying to understand the UN today?
Well, first, remember its origins. A post-WWII dream of preventing war. Idealistic, important.
Right.
Second, it does do a lot of valuable work through its agencies, health aid, culture, etc. That shouldn't be dismissed.
Okay.
But third, its core mission of maintaining peace and security faces major hurdles. The Security Council structure, especially the veto, is a big one.
Yeah.
And fourth, the competing interests of member states. The reality of national sovereignty often limits collective action. And finally, these ongoing debates, like the China-Taiwan representation issue, show the UN is constantly grappling with how to reflect global realities and interpret its own history. It's not static.
So it's complicated. It's limited, but maybe still indispensable in some ways.
That's probably a good way to put it. Flawed, challenged, but perhaps still necessary.
Which leads to the final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Given these structural limits, given the messy world we live in, what is the realistic future role for the UN in keeping peace?
Yeah, and maybe how could it be reformed or adapted to be more effective? Can those limitations be overcome somehow?
Big questions. Definitely something to mull over after this dive.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that wraps up another deep dive. Thanks, as always, for tuning in and exploring the sometimes baffling world of the UN with us.
Yeah, thanks for sticking with us through the twists and turns.
We hope you've got a clearer idea now of why it started, the whole China seat saga, which is just fascinating, and the real challenges it faces today.
Hopefully some useful context for understanding world events.
Definitely. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
See you then.